Hi, welcome to Exploring the Illusion of Free Will. My name is George Ortega, and this is episode number 142, Free Will, Refuting Roy Baumeister's Slate.com Defense Part 3, okay? And we're going to go through as many parts of this as we need to, okay? I'm taping this on October 15th, 2013. Okay, and like Roy Baumeister is I didn't get much sleep last night, that's why I'm having trouble talking. But anyway, Baumeister is a psychologist at Florida State University. He wrote an article that appeared in the September 25th online issue, because I think Slate is an online magazine. I'm not sure it's got a print. But anyway, it's Slate.com, very popular internet magazine. And it was titled, Do You Really Have a Free Will? Now, if you go to I want to briefly say, if you go to that article, okay, just Google it, Baumeister or Slate Free Will. If you go for Slate Free Will, you'll probably get to it. It's called Do You Really Have a Free Will? And Baumeister, is claiming we do, all right? So I went on that site, and I've got at least 2 or 3 dozen comments, extensive comments, where I refute his claim in various ways. But, I wanted to get this out, on video, too. All right, so this is and this is the third part of the series. I don't know how many parts it's going to take, because last episode, we went through one statement that he made, and that was the entire show. All right, so and I've got 7 pages. We're on page 1 of his, and I'm going to paraphrase mainly. I'm not going to quote that often, but anyway, so we're going to go through his article and just demonstrate why Baumeister is wrong, why we don't have a free will. All right? So here we go. All right. Now, the next thing that Baumeister says is that he kind of this is going to attitude in science. He's saying that scientists delight in disproving conventional wisdom. Scientists don't delight in, because that's kind of like a negative slur. That's kind of like negative. Scientists don't delight in overcoming or disproving conventional wisdom. Scientists delight in discerning truth, okay? Yeah, a lot of times, it's not, and he uses the term quote-unquote conventional wisdom. It's not a lot of times conventional quote-unquote wisdom that scientists are refuting. Scientists are refuting conventional or popular myths or misconceptions or mistakes. In other words, scientists, a long time ago, everybody thought that the sun revolved around the earth, okay? Scientists proved them wrong. They didn't take delight in just setting people right about this mistaken perception. They delighted in getting it right. Scientists love truth. That's the thing. And they don't get sidetracked by their personal motivations. They think a certain thing has to be a certain way because that would make them feel better. A real scientist, just goes to the truth and understands it because it's truth. It's an appreciation of truth. Anyway, another thing, scientists, for example, the conventional popular understanding was that the earth was flat, okay? Scientists didn't delight in setting people right about that. Scientists delighted in understanding and learning how to understand and finally understanding and explaining that the world is not flat. And a lot of examples that the world is not motionless, it's actually spinning or actually hurtling through, for example, spinning around, the earth is spinning around the sun at over 60,000 miles per hour, a lot of stuff. So anyway, so scientists, again, don't quote unquote delight in overturning conventional, especially quote-unquote wisdom. What they do is they overturn conventional myths, like evolution, Darwin. Darwin, he set stuff right. The first woman wasn't pulled out of the rib of the first man. Okay. And I know this is a bit off the point, but he's he's making, and another thing he says that he says that scientists, quote-unquote, advance their careers, by doing this. That is a classic case of projection, because in other words, these scientists that are refuting the notion of free will are telling people things that people do not want to hear. People aren't very pleased when they're told that they don't have any more control over their lives than does a robot or a puppet or a computer, okay? Scientists, the people who are advancing their careers are the scientists like Baumeister, who are telling people what they want to hear, irregardless of the truth of it. That it's not science, it's not really a good thing to do. It's actually a dangerous thing to do because, with this whole free will thing, you've got the entire world completely deluded about who we are as a humanity, who we are as people, why we do what we do. And because of this delusion, it creates so many problems. I've gotten into this in a lot of other shows. I'll get into it. Who knows? Maybe I can get into it here. All right, yeah, with the free will illusion, to the extent we believe we have a free will, that what we do, think, say, and all is up to us, when other people do things that are wrong, we're going to blame them. And it's not that the things that people do aren't wrong, but it's not up to them. They had to do them. When you do wrong, it wasn't up to you. You had to do whatever wrong you did. Okay, fine. So what happens is you may get angry at God or the universe for making people do wrong, but you're not going to get angry with them. And so many problems in the world is that we mistakenly attribute free will to others and to ourselves. That creates a lot of blame, which creates hate, which creates vengeance, which creates revenge, which creates punishment, retributive punishment. It's really a negative thing. And I'll explain why we don't need this free will notion to maintain our rules of order and all that stuff later. But I can't divert too much. But anyway, so again, the people who take delight in this, they're the people who are advancing their careers, rather, are the people, the psychologists that are philosophers that are telling people what they want to know. Oh, yeah, I just wanted to mention another way this is really important relates to climate change. There's a lot of scientists now that are telling people what they want to know in terms of climate change. People don't want to hear that in 3 decades, because we haven't been done what we should have been doing, because we're still not doing what we should be doing, that the world is going to be in a very, very challenging state. I mean, between the disease vectors and the rising sea levels and the stronger hurricanes and the diminishing water supplies and just a lot of stuff, that's going to cause a lot of geopolitical turmoil, wars and all that stuff. Unfortunately, some scientists advance their careers by telling people what they want to hear, but it's not what's good for them to hear. It's kind of like you go to a doctor, and the doctor would tell you, listen, you're completely healthy, when you're not, and that doctor's not doing you a favor. These scientists that are telling you that climate change isn't happening, they might make you feel good now, but 20, 30 years from now, you're going to regret that you believe them, and especially if you have kids or grandkids, they're going to pay the price. All right, so so these scientists and philosophers are advancing their careers by telling people what they want to hear in terms of this free will that we don't have. And they think that, again, all right, you can't blame them. They have no control of what they're doing. I'm not going to say that, that they're bad, evil people, because that's the point of this. To the extent you understand nobody has a free will, you don't condemn people, you don't blame people. But you still have to recognize that they're doing something wrong, something they don't recognize it's wrong. Because again, we're compelled to always seek to do what we think is right. They think they're doing people a favor by telling them, convincing them of something that's not true. Anyway, so this is so basically, yeah, the scientists who are advancing their careers are the scientists who are telling people, and there's, whatever, that they have a free will when they don't. Okay, let's see, what else? Okay, yeah, all right, so we're done with that statement. Look at that. We got 10 minutes into it. All right, so Baumeister's next statement is all right, now he claims that these scientists' statements that we don't have a free will are misleading. No, they're not misleading. They're completely on target. Scientists now, neuroscientists, physicists, they're telling people the truth. Basically our decisions are not up to us. Our decisions are made at the level of the unconscious. And then Baumeister's sometimes saying that these conclusions that these scientists are saying are quote-unquote downright mistaken. No, they're not mistaken. Free will is impossible. Causality makes free will impossible. The unconscious makes free will impossible. Think about it. If you had a free will, free will means pretty much that you can think, say, feel, do whatever you want, independent of anything that's not in your control. If you really had a free will, you'd be blissed out every moment of every day. You'd be thinking thoughts that are pleasant. You wouldn't allow unpleasant thoughts into your life. You wouldn't allow negative emotions into your life. You wouldn't allow yourself to do things that are morally reprehensible. We're not perfect. If we were perfect, if we were perfect, that would mean we'd have a free will, because there's part of us who would want to be perfect. So anyway, so all right, and so anyway, so he's basically, he mentions this guy, like, he says that some people have pointed this out, that these scientists are mistaken by claiming we don't have free will. And he's got a link to this guy's article. The guy is Al Mealy, who's a professor, I think, at Florida University of Florida, whatever. And he happens to head this $4.1 million Templeton fund to try to defend free will. In other words, this guy heads this endowment, a lot of money that he gives to philosophers and scientists who he thinks are going to defend the notion of free will. So this is not the right guy to be listening to about this thing about free will. Anyway, so basically, like, it's classic projection. He's saying that the statements of the scientists are mistaken and misleading, when actually it's his statements that are actually misleading. One way his statements are misleading is, like, it's a classic straw man argument. In other words, like, since before Spinoza, since the time of the Greeks, the question of free will has been whether we have any more control than does a puppet or a robot or a computer. And the Greeks understood this in terms of, like, the fates, these gods, these fates that would control everything. And you couldn't do what you wanted to because these gods were controlling everything, okay? And so the Greeks understood this. Like, this has been the debate throughout the centuries, whether we have any more control than a robot does, than a puppet does. We don't, okay? So now Baumeister and others understand this, but they can't accept it. And again, you can't blame them because they don't have free will. So what do? Classic straw man argument. This is the misleading part. He's accusing scientists of being misleading, when actually the misleading is coming from these people who are, like, defending free will. What they do is they'll change the meaning of the term, of the concept free will. They'll say, no, free will doesn't mean that we have more control than a robot or a puppet or an automaton. If you ask them, they'd probably say, if they're honest, they'd probably say, no, we don't have any more control than them. These are compatibilists, whatever. I mean, that's a term in philosophy. Anyway, what they'll say is, like, free will is when I have the will that I want to have. In other words, when I want to, like, let's say, have lunch later, and I'm able to have lunch, that's a freely willed decision, okay? So they're changing the meaning of free will in order to try to demonstrate it, but even that fails, okay? Even that fails, because the idea is, I explained this on the last episode, I might as well explain it now. And this is something that Kant said. Kant said, like, free will is having the will that we want to have, whatever, right? Schopenhauer, another philosopher, corrected him. He said, fine, but we can't decide what we want, and that's the key, all right? Because, like, let's say I want to go have lunch later, okay? So that's a decision, okay? Now, these compatibilist straw man definitions of free will that Baumeister is advancing, trying to, propose, would claim that free will is attributed to the person, okay? That free will, a person has free will if he can, like, decide, if he can, like, pursue what he wants to decide. If he, if he decides something and he's able to decide it, or whatever, it happens. But here's the thing. again, let's say I decide to go to lunch. There will have been a cause to that decision, because everything has to have a cause. Sometimes people say that, well, not everything has a cause, like in quantum mechanics, certain things happen that aren't caused. That's wrong, okay? That's based on this Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. It's just wrong, okay? Basically, the idea was that, like, because you can't simultaneously measure the position and momentum of a particle, some ostensibly intelligent physicists made the claim that, therefore, these particles don't have a simultaneous position and momentum, and additionally that the behavior of these particles is uncaused, indeterministic in the sense of not caused. Now, again, in fairness, a lot of the physicists, when they use the term indeterminism, they don't mean that. They simply mean that we can't rely on classical mechanics to perform predictions at the quantum level. We have to rely on probabilities, but these probabilities are nonetheless based on the measurement, the classical measurement of groups of particles. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So the idea is you make a decision, and the other thing with the uncaused thing, let's say, I'd give you the benefit of the doubt. Fine, certain things happened uncaused, okay? You couldn't use that as a defense for free will, because if you're claiming that you have a free will, you're claiming that you caused something to happen, okay? That you caused your decision, that you freely willed or caused your decision. But if you're claiming that it's not caused, you didn't cause it. Nothing caused it. It's uncaused, okay? All right, so anyway, but let's get back to the real reason why any kind of free will definition, including Baumeister's, that attributes it to a human being has to be wrong. So you make a decision. That decision has a cause, because everything has to have a cause, all right? And the cause of that decision has a cause, and the cause of that cause has a cause. And you've got this chain of cause and effect going back in time, further and further and further. And it goes back to before you were born, before the planet was created, all the way back to the Big Bang. Okay? So the idea is, like, it's the Big Bang, or it's whatever happened, that came before the Big Bang, that is deciding, quote unquote. You're never making any decision. In other words, free will would attribute your decisions, to you. These decisions that, like, wanting the will you want to have. You can't even do that, because this chain of cause and effect regresses back in time to before you were born. Okay. So, all right, I think we've dealt with that. Got about 9 minutes left. Okay. So his next claim is that arguments about free will, basically saying this whole free will thing is basically a semantic thing. That some people say free will means a certain thing, other people say that it means a certain thing. It's really a semantic thing. And as I just demonstrated, it doesn't matter how you define free will. If you're ascribing free will to a human being, you're wrong. If a human being cannot have a free will, again, because anything we decide is decided for us by this chain of cause and effect. Okay, that's the key point. Okay. And I'm going to go through some more about this. I don't know, we've got about 8 minutes. I think I can go through it. Okay, again, we went through the idea that, if our decisions weren't caused, if everything wasn't caused and certain things weren't caused, that's not going to give you free will either. Again, because something that's not caused can't be attributed to a human being. But how about the prospect of, because there's other notions, in an attempt to kind of salvage this belief in free will, these philosophers and psychologists will go to really insane, really absurd, prospects. So some philosophers, psychologists will claim some things in reality can be causa sui. They can be the cause of themselves. Okay, now there's a famous kind of a dictum, a kind of a precept in philosophy and science, whatever. Nothing can be causa sui. Nothing can be the cause of itself. Now, I don't know, if you want to go back to the origin of the universe, maybe the universe caused itself. Who knows? Or God maybe caused himself. But, certainly after the Big Bang, nothing can be the cause of itself because the universe evolves in a state-by-state progression, each state of the universe being caused by the previous state all the way back to the Big Bang and what happened before. So the idea is even if you were to grant again that certain things could cause themselves, that's not going to give you free will, because let's say you have a decision or you choose something, you decide something, you do something, and you're saying, well, I have a free will because that decision was causa sui. That decision caused itself. If the decision caused itself, you couldn't have caused it. Okay, you're saying the decision caused itself. Okay, you're not causing something that caused itself. All right, so this causa sui notion isn't going to give you free will either. Sometimes philosophers and some psychologists will say, well, my free will decisions arise out of nothing, ex nihilo, something from nothing. That's not going to give you free will because, again, we're not nothing. Our will isn't nothing. We're something. We're something. So basically that's just not going to give you free will. Okay. And so basically I'm going through the 5 theoretical action mechanisms that are possible. The 4 alternative ones to the way things really are, this causality. But, these notions that people come up with trying to defend free will. So ex nihilo, no, that's not going to give you free will. It's something from nothing. Okay. Last one, some people claim that it's such a thing as retrocausality. They say that actually certain things in the future can control what's happening in the present and then control what's happening in the past. That causality doesn't just go forward, it actually goes backwards also. That's an absurd contention, there's this arrow of time in physics that reality always goes from past to present to future. It's never, there's not an instance of that arrow of time being violated. Sometimes you'll hear people say that quantum mechanics equations are symmetrical in the sense that they can work backwards in time as well as forwards. Fine, but that's the math. That's kind of like saying that you can subtract 2 from 1 and get a -1, but you can't subtract 2 apples from 1 apple and end up with something as a reality called a negative apple. It doesn't happen. All right, so anyway, and again, the best that retrocausality could get you, if it did exist, was the things after you had died would be determining the decisions you made while you were alive. So again, that's not free will. If the things that are happening, let's say, after you die, after the planet no longer exists, after the sun is burnt out, trillions of years from now, are deciding what happens now. Because again, a retrocausal chain of effect would never end. It would the vast, future would be deciding what would be happening now. So anyway, basically all 5 possible action mechanisms, theoretical, because I don't think there's any other. If there are, let me know. They all refute free will. Okay. Got 4 minutes. I'm getting tired. All right. So now his next claim is that these experts that are refuting free will are refuting quote-unquote unscientific versions of that idea. No, the scientists that are refuting free will are refuting both scientific versions and unscientific versions of free will. Because as explained to you before, if you want to define free will in a different way that's conventionally understood and has been understood this way for hundreds of years, and you're attributing this free will to a human being, that's not going to work either, because the chain of causes that leads up to whatever decision that person you believe has a free will made is going to regress to before the person was born. Okay, so basically, the experts were refuting all versions of free will, both, and he's all right. The other claim he makes is that these experts are refuting free will, a version of free will where causality is not involved. that's true in a sense, but that's only because, like, some philosophers, some psychologists are making that claim. In other words, the scientists that are refuting free will are refuting all versions of free will, including those that claim that free will comes about from things that aren't caused. But mainly, you know, the scientists who know what they're doing are going to refute the free will that is caused. And basically the way they'll refute it is, like, some people will say, well, you know, like, I have a free will. Compatibilist philosophers are people who they say they accept causality, but they don't really understand it, because if they really understood it, they'd understand that free will is impossible. They say, like, you know, yes, I accept causality, but I still have a free will. How do scientists refute this? They say, well, all right, well, if you accept causality, you have to understand that every decision you make has a cause, and there's cause to that cause, and there's cause to that cause, and its causal regression goes back to before you were born, so obviously you don't have free will. All right, so anyway, the point in this is that scientists are refuting both scientific and unscientific versions of free will concocted by these philosophers and psychologists who need to have free will and, you know, just circumvent their reasoning to try to defend it. And these scientists are also refuting versions of free will that include causality, such as the compatibilist versions, and also try to claim that causality doesn't exist, such as libertarian versions of free will by these guys. No, it's different than political libertarianism, but anyway. So anyway, I'm running out of time. Got 40 seconds, and we're getting through this. Like, I thought this might, like, go through, like, 3 episodes. We might, this might be 5 or so. I don't know, it's 6. I don't know, because we're going kind of slow. And I want to, like, be clear about refuting this very precisely, very completely in each episode, because it's important. All right, well, this is George Ortega. You know, all right, this was like episode 3 or part 3 of the Baumeister series. We're going to go to part 4 the next time, and we're going to keep going through this article in SlateMagazine.com, September 25th. And all right, so I'll see you next week on Exploring the Illusion of Free Will. Thanks for watching.